Hello, it is time for Chapter 13 Key Questions. So, number one, why was Andrew Jackson so upset after the election of 1824? Answer to that is that he won the popular vote and had the most electoral college votes, but he did not win because he did not have the correct amount, or he did not meet the threshold for victory. So the election goes into the House of Representatives, where supposedly he says the quote unquote corrupt bargain occurs between Henry Clay and John Quincy Adams. What happens is Henry Clay receives the Secretary of State position, and John Quincy Adams is able to win the presidency. So that upset Andrew Jackson because he believed that he was the rightful president and that it was a corrupt deal that robbed him of his chance to be president. Number two, what did Adams and Clay accomplish during their time in office? Unfortunately, it's hard to name a lot of specifics that they were able to accomplish, but they did push ahead with Henry Clay's American system, trying to create a bank and reinforce it, trying to create infrastructure that spread across the country. Unfortunately, their push for an observatory and a national university alienated the quote-unquote common man that Jackson himself loved. So unfortunately, Adams and Clay did not accomplish that much. What they did do is avoid using some of the negative things that Jackson did, such as patronage. Number three, how did Jackson represent the common man during his time in office? Um, so Andrew Jackson wins the election of 1828, a very tough election in which there was a lot of mudslinging and dirt thrown around. But Jackson represents the common man because, number one, he is not college educated, your second president to be so. He is the first president from beyond the Appalachians, so he's from the West, the frontier, so he represented the common man there. He also claimed to have been born in a log cabin and had beginnings to his life, just like many of the men and women in America would have also had that background. So Jackson represented them in that way. He also represented them in his political beliefs. He believed in democracy, true democracy, and that the common man should have a say in the government, and that elites, like in his mind, Henry Clay and John Quincy Adams, should not create programs like the Bank of the United States. They should not use our tax money in order to build things like an observatory and fund a national university. So he both represented the common man in his background and in his political philosophy. Number four, what caused the tariff crisis? The tariff crisis occurs because the tariff rate in 1828 is raised beyond what the state of South Carolina and many Southerners were comfortable with. South Carolina moves ahead and tries to nullify the tariff. They look back at the evidence, or I guess you could say the resolutions passed by Jefferson and Madison, known as Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. And they use that as the basis for their argument that states should be able to nullify federal laws. So the battle is both between South Carolina and the federal government, but on a more personal level, the former Vice President John C. Calhoun splits with Andrew Jackson, and he supports South Carolina, whereas Jackson supports the idea that the federal government should be allowed to enforce it, primarily, being honest, because he was president, as he was a states' rights supporter before his presidency. So how is this? How is this event solved? South Carolina threatens to secede. They do nullify the tariff, at least for a short period of time. Andrew Jackson steps in and he threatens to invade and crush them, to make an example of them for their resistance. What happens, though, is in Congress, as this crisis is unfolding, Henry Clay is able to get Congress to agree to a compromise tariff in which the rates would go gradually decrease over the next 8 years. So we avoid warfare. However, this shows that the federal government is willing to throw its weight behind stopping states' rights from achieving their ultimate goal of nullifying federal laws. Number five, name the 5 civilized tribes: Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, and you have the Seminoles in Florida. How and why were they removed? Let's start with why. The why is because they had land. While there are cultural issues, while many Native American tribes were never going to be able to fully assimilate, is the key word there, or become part of American society. So despite those cultural issues, the main reason is the land. That's the one thing they wanted. So that's why when the civilized tribes who tried their best to assimilate to American culture, why they're still removed is because the Americans didn't want them there. The common man, the frontiersmen, wanted them gone. So how are they removed? First, you have the Indian Removal Act passed by Andrew Jackson, and they are forcefully removed. Of course, you've heard of the Trail of Tears, in which it said at least a quarter of the Cherokee tribe passed away as they were forcibly removed and forced to walk all the way out to Oklahoma. So, getting to Jackson number 3, or question number 6 on here, but the third major thing of Jackson's presidency. Why did he want to kill the bus? Well, first and foremost, it was, to him, something created by elites to control the economy, to control the states, and something that was out of the hands of the common man. Jackson also believed that states should have control over the finances and the taxes coming in and out. Who battled him over the bus? Henry Clay in Congress. It was part of his American System plan, and he decided to make it the main issue of the 1832 election. He wanted to use that election to push an early rechartering of the Bank of the United States. Unfortunately for Henry Clay, Andrew Jackson did represent the common man. He wins the presidency, and in his next presidential term, he kills the bank by draining it of its money. He used the money from the Bank of the United States to pay off the nation's debts, and he didn't put any more tax money in. Instead, he sent it out to state banks. So what effect, number 7, what effect did the death of the Bank of the United States have on the nation politically? Well, first of all, it led to division. You have the Whig Party become a thing, and the major driving force behind the Whig Party was the death of the bus, but primarily it was that they hated Andrew Jackson and they wanted to cancel out anything he attempted to do. What about economically? And this kind of gets into number 8 as well. So 7 and 8 are fairly similar because Martin Van Buren's the one who faces these issues. But economically, it creates a panic. In 1837, we have a panic which causes massive issues across the nation, especially for those who are poor. The common man or the farmer was the one who's hit the hardest as businessmen are able to keep kind of their money. So, number 8. What challenges did Martin Van Buren face in his presidency? As I mentioned, the economics. With a panic, no president has ever survived an economic panic except for James Monroe. And so Martin Van Buren faced that major issue which crushed him in any hopes he had of re-election. He also has the rising Whig Party who resists anything and everything he could have wanted to accomplish in his presidency. So the two primary things that he faced politically and economically really had to do with the actions taken by Jackson, the enemies Jackson made, and the damage that Jackson did to the economy. Number 9. What had encouraged Stephen Austin and other Americans to settle in Texas? And what restrictions did Mexico place on them? First and foremost, Mexico encouraged them. They invited and allowed them to move into the Texas area because they were hoping to establish Texas as a profitable area. What restrictions did Mexico place on them? Well, as Stephen Austin came into the area to make a living for himself and the other Americans, they wanted to bring in with them slaves. And the Mexican government began to place restrictions on slavery as they were not exactly fond of it. The other restriction placed on them is that they had to convert to Catholicism, a practice you could trace all the way back to the Spanish Empire if you wanted to. So Mexico, a proud Catholic nation, both tried to force them to become Catholic and tried to stop them from bringing their slaves in. So how did they win independence? Well, after Stephen Austin fails to negotiate with Santa Anna, they decided to declare their independence and fight. You have a few terrible defeats at the Battle of the Alamo and at the Goliad. And after those two disastrous defeats and the slaughter of American, or technically Texans, but Americans who died in those battles, many volunteers flood the Texan territory to help them against Santa Anna. When Santa Anna is defeated, Texas officially gains its independence. However, they're not immediately annexed by the United States. So the second part of number 10, why were they not immediately annexed? Well, first of all, Jackson did not want to risk any kind of conflict with a foreign country, and so warfare is one reason why he resisted. The second would be that slavery was still a divisive issue. Should you add another state that would be a slave state, that would once again bring up those divisions which we talked about in the Missouri Compromise just a little bit before this. Number 11. What political trends formed during Jackson's presidency that extended into the election of 1840 and beyond? Well, first of all, presidents make sure, or people running for president, candidates, made sure that people knew that they were just like them. They campaigned frequently that they were born in a log cabin, that they came from those poor roots on the frontier, and here they are making their way to the top, but they haven't lost just how So they haven't lost that frontier spirit. So the idea of pandering to the people definitely begins with Jackson and continues on. What other trends? Well, we have the two political parties which continue in battle. Another political trend could easily be considered the national conventions that political parties would form. This is the first, in 1840, this is the first election where you have a slogan, Tippecanoe and Tyler too. They have banners, they have buttons, and across the country they're very well organized. So you could say the formation of true modern political parties begins following Jackson with their national conventions and their massive marketing campaigns. So those political trends continue. One last thing I guess I could throw out there is that the constant battle between the frontiersman and the common man and what's perceived as the elites. What role does the federal government play in building a national economy? And what power do the states have to limit the federal government's power? As you know, in the 1850s and 60s, a crisis grows, and that ends up creating the Civil War. While slavery was undoubtedly the major cause of that conflict, states' rights did play a part in it. The idea that states should be allowed to decide their own future on tariffs, their own future on slavery, their own future on everything, is what helped drive the wedge between the two sides of our country. So that is Chapter 13, Key Questions. If you have any questions yourself beyond the 11 listed here, just let me know. Shoot me a message. The least you could do is click that, see that like button? You could click that. Subscribe. Whatever. You do you. See ya.